So before we start, I just wanted to give you some basics on using the pencil. I know it's it sounds pretty stupid, but actually, yeah, I just wanted to. So usually the kind of pencil that you can find almost everywhere is the HP pencil, right? So in order to keep it simple, just remember that HP is like in the middle, okay? So it's not too dark, it's not too light, okay? So, and you can play around with the pressure to make it darker or lighter. Okay, so we'll talk about that in the tutorial. Even if I'm going to be using digital to explain the landscape drawing. Um, and then you have these different, I don't have the whole set, I just bought a few that I really use commonly. So for example here, when you have, so this is a 4B, and this is this is actually the darkest pencil I have that I use for the really dark areas, the dark shadows, cast shadows, and so on. And then you have, I think the lightest one I have is the 7H. So as you can already see, it's really light. Okay, so just keep in mind that whenever you have H, so the higher the number gets, it gets lighter, and then it gets closer. So for example, I have 4H, so 4H will be closer to HP in the middle, and then 4B does the same thing. So you can find this on the internet if you're if that helps. But yeah, just keep that in mind. But I think most of my tutorials can be drawn with a pencil, like a HP pencil. So and I also use a mechanical pencil. So and each of them have pros and cons. So for example, when I'm going out sketching, I usually take a mechanical pencil, even if it's just like the line is really thin and I cannot do the shading, because I don't have to sharpen it each time. So I just need to change the nib, not the nib, yeah, I don't know how to say it. um, and this one, it gives me a little bit more movement, flexibility, like it's sort of soft, the lead is softer. So it gives me more movement. And because the mechanical pencil is a little bit sharp, it tends to like dig into the paper. So it might be limiting, like these are small things, but can be important as you practice and learn more about drawing in pencils. And of course, eraser. So I use two types of erasers. The one small one was for small areas, and this one for big areas. The other thing that I wanted to cover, especially with the I'll call them normal pencils, is the way you can hold the pencil. So when I start, usually in the beginning, I usually start far away from the tip, because I'm not applying too much pressure. I'm just like putting the basic outline, and if I'm happy with that, then I can get closer and apply more pressure for the details. But otherwise, I'll play like this because it's easier to correct the mistakes in the beginning. So for example, if I do this and I erase, it's easier to erase than if I apply too hard. And then even if yes, I can erase, but there will always be some mark left. Okay, I don't know if it shows in the camera, I think it shows slightly. So at the end, if you're drawing for like an hour or like even 30 minutes, like if you're doing that and erasing constantly, your art might look really dirty and messy and might not be clear for the people who are looking at it. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, so holding a pencil, yeah, like this, or for details like this. I also try to hold like for shading. So for example, I'll sharpen it, and then this is like, I also hold it like this so that I can use the side of the pencil. So it gives me really these beautiful like thick lines like this, flat lines like this. And I also hold it like this. For example, if I'm doing like a tree. So yeah, it really depends. Like I also use it like sometimes like this, like as if it looks like, I'm holding a razor blade for shave. And actually that's how I feel. I'm shaving out the forms and shapes that I want out of the blank piece of paper. So speaking of paper, as you can see here, this is a watercolor paper, and this has a lot of texture already in it. So also be mindful of that, because if you want to create your own texture and you don't want to be at the mercy of the paper, choose a simple paper, like for example this one it's really smooth. So if I let me just take the last page. So if I do this, you can see the difference. This is like really clear, and here there are almost holes. Like it almost looks like a beehive. So yeah, I just wanted to give that quick introduction before I go into the tutorial. I might also put this video in as a separate video because I think this will be a good thing to know. And if you have any questions about the pencils, please let me know in the comment section below. And let's get to landscape drawing.
So let's start with some basic elements that I think are most commonly found in landscapes. So I'm just going to give you, again, I've done another separate video on how to draw trees and flowers. You can also check that out. But I'm just going to show you how to draw a tree, rocks, mountains, and water. So for the tree, and you'll see the process starts with in the same way, which is like I start with an outline. And the good thing about drawing trees is that you can draw organic shapes, so you're not really following, unless you're using a reference picture, you're not really following exact dimensions or geometrical shapes. And this is the trunk, and then I would just draw like groups of leaves, like clumps of leaves, and I would draw them in this sort of ball-like shape. Again, this really depends on the tree. Here this is like just almost like a generic tree. And when I'm drawing those balls of leaves, I'm just suggesting with the edges that they are made out of leaves, so they are not exact circles, but almost look like this. How can I say this? These balls with like rugged edges, and also the shape of the edges that you're drawing for these will depend on the shape of the leaves that you have in front of you, or the shape of the leaves of the tree that you're trying to draw. And here I define a single source of lighting, so that I know that I'm going to be focusing on the other side where the shadows will fall, and that's where I'll be focusing on when it comes to the details, the texture. And just by doing, you can already see there, just by putting those little lines and just adding in lines will create denser lines, will create darker areas. And of course the darker areas are found where the furthest away from the light source, which is, so for example, the light is coming from the top right hand side, our right hand side corner, so the darkest areas will be found usually on the left bottom side of the object. And also between those lumps of leaves, the light can't get through, so it's really dark. And now I get into the trunk. So trunk is a little bit simpler because I just go and draw random lines, almost like spaghetti lines, but still following that the contour of the trunk. And And here I'm just adding a hole to just like sort of push that. I don't know, that I really love trees that have holes in them like that. So, and the first I just put some like a first layer of texture. And going in again to sort of accentuate the dark areas to create that three-dimensionality. And you'll see the same kind of process for the other items that I'm going to show you right now. So here's one way you can approach a tree. Okay. Another one is rocks. Rocks, so again, I start with the outline, and I sort of define like random cracks, like shapes. Again, because we were dealing with nature, like there's not a lot of straight lines. So, for example, here I'm imagining that the light is coming from the our left-hand side, from the up left-hand side corner. And here I'm just going a little bit quicker, like I'm putting in like the shadow areas, but not completely all putting parallel diagonal lines. I'm just varying the direction of the lines to sort of emulate that sort of cracks kind of effect. And then the dots just push that surface like to make it believe that it's actually a rock. So you can, and again, you can add as many details as you want, but and that will allow you to create rocks. Now for mountains, it's because they're kind of like giant rocks, so the process is similar. So for the picture that I'm using here as reference to help me with show, I don't know how the phenomenon is called, but like it's because of the rains that the mountains are shaped that way. And I should have done research, but so the lines that I'm drawing here sort of like reflect that. So the surface of the mountain sort of reflect that. And you might have noticed, like, I don't know if you can notice, but like compared to others, like I'm sort of applying what I talked about in the beginning. Even if I'm doing this digitally, I'm still applying a light amount of pressure to create that distance and to sort of create that and you'll see when I'll do the final picture, I just want to show some depth. And speaking of cracks, like, because it's like mountains are like basically giant rocks, the cracks will be bigger, so they sort of can house more larger areas of shadows. And the other thing that I think I didn't mention, which is how to smoothen out your pencil lines. You can many people do use their fingers to smudge their pencil lines to create a smooth surface. I don't recommend that because I don't want people to get their hands dirty, and so especially if you're going to spend a lot of time drawing that piece. I suggest using a piece of paper from your sketchbook. Like, you can just go to the last page of a sketchbook and just tear a little corner piece of the paper, and then use that as to smudge the areas that you want. Or my favorite are the cotton swabs, which are really great to that. Or if you can afford it, and if you can find the professional material, just a stump. I don't know. I don't know about the cost, but I usually don't ask people to buy specific material because I kind of want people to draw with what they have, and then when they sort of feel bored, they can sort of move to other materials. But so I would just suggest, like, use the things that you have around you to draw for especially if you're starting out. And with digital, it's even easier because in digital software, so here I'm using Clip Studio Paint, they actually have like blending or smudging brushes tools. So here for these rocks, of course the light is coming, so we are on the other dark side of the rock, right? So everything is dark, and so the way I created that sort of rock-like effect, which was just varying again those cross-hatching lines. No way, not to create like all diagonals, because then that will not look natural. So again, I'm using that like blending brush to smoothen out the surface, the reflection, to create that sort of like water reflection kind of effect. And so I'm just adding layers over layers, and it's like, like especially with pencils, or I think anything, even paint, like I think everything is in the layers. Of course, yeah, be careful, like I said, always go from light to dark, because if you make a mistake with really dark pencil, it will be difficult to correct. And just by those like sort of almost parallel lines, like sort of reflecting the contour of the rocks, you can create that reflection on the water. So on to our finally to the drawing that I'm going to do this. So I'm going to skip through a lot of different phases, but basically what I do is, first of all, I start by outlining all the different parts that I see from the picture. So in this case, first the mountains, then the trees. So clearly the mountains are behind the trees. And then this I don't know if I can, I think it's a river, so a river. And then of course the foreground, so the foreground, middle ground, and background. So in the foreground we have these plants, these hedges. In the middle ground you have the river and the trees, and on the background you have the mountains. And even within the mountains, like the mountain on the left is closer than the mountain on the right, if you can tell. So sometimes, yes, fog can push things backward, but generally it's the particles, like the further something is, the less saturated it is if you're working with colors, for example. And in this case, since we're working with basically pencils which give us only access to grays, which is fine, we are going to use the different kind of pencils, the different kinds of pressure to accomplish the variations in values. It really depends on how much detail you want to put in, because and here, for example, I'm just starting with the tree. So you can spend as much time you want to really like replicate the details of the picture, which is really difficult. It might take a really long time. If you're just doing a sketch like this, so what I'm doing, you have to find sort of shortcuts to do the outline of the trees. So for example here, the trees, I represented them sort of like in the beginning like almost like parallel lines stacked on top of each other. So I'm skipping through the steps because I kept the speed in real time, but I just wanted, I don't think there's anything new that I can say about what I'm doing here, so I'm just expose. Sometimes, like for example, if I want to cover a large area with like a light gray and then go over it with some darker where I apply more pressure to create the outline of the trees, so I can do that too. And also, if you want to, you can also smoothen out the trees and then go in with more texture, and then smoothen out that, and then go in with more texture. So just create more texture, sort of create that depth. I have to admit, like, I could have done more with the water, but that was not my focus. My focus was mainly the mountains and the trees, and even the ones in the foreground. I didn't really want people to focus on that. So. And again, I would like to remind that this was again a topic that we covered in my weekly Sunday online event for my meetup, and you can join in and suggest the topic for the next time. So this is a video sort of summarizing the main topics that I covered during those meetups. So it takes place online through Zoom. So I recently started using Zoom, and recently started using Zoom where I think it's a little bit better because Zoom allows me to share my screen on my tablet, but at the same time speak with the webcam, and it takes place online. I live in Bangkok, so it's every Sunday at 2 p.m. Bangkok time. For the moment, I'm keeping that timing, but it might change in the future. But so if you're interested, please see in the description for the link to my meetup group. You can see for the next events. And if you become a member, you'll be notified about the next events. But otherwise, I'll just like to thank you for watching. Hope this was helpful, and as always, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.